Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm making this video as a follow-up to my first video about God. And I'm making this video because it was very fascinating to just look at some of the comments. And I think the first or one of the first comments that popped up was somebody who said something along the lines of um, that I wasn't defining atheism correctly. And I believe in the video I said, an atheist is someone that doesn't believe in God. And so when he challenged me, I kind of like, so something, is there like a definition? I know that there are some arguments for atheism that I find kind of funny. Like one of them was when some of us refer to atheism as a religion, it's just a religion that where you don't believe in God. And there's reasons why I call it a religion. Um, they'll say that's like saying that being bald is a hairstyle, right? And they say, of course, it's not a hairstyle. It's so atheism is not a religion. But I was looking up, when when this person said that I didn't define atheism properly, I thought, well, maybe there's something that I don't know. Let me look this up. One of the things that's happened recently, and this happened in my lifetime, I don't know if it happened prior, but um, words that we thought we believed or we knew the definition of, um, our culture, primarily starting in universities, but then in popular culture, will change the definition of something that we thought we knew. And most often it's very dishonest. It's to promote something. For example, 30 years ago, I was having a discussion with my wife's best friend, and it was on racism. And I was arguing that, racism is simply, and the argument was this: a black person can be racist. And her friend says, "Oh no, that's impossible. That's not true." I'm like, "Well, of course it is. If a black person says I hate white people, or white people are evil, or white people are stupid, or white people are a certain thing, that's racist." And the argument in this one, I found out that this is the definition that was being thrown around, and it's still around. It hasn't been fully embraced by everyone, unless you're in academics, in academia. But it's that to be a racist, not only do you have to discriminate and be prejudiced, is that you also have to be in power. And since black people aren't in power, and I assume that Hispanic people aren't in power, maybe they're arguing that because Hispanic people, maybe in Mexico, I can um, be racist, but I can't be racist here. But unless you're in power, you can't be racist. All you can be is prejudice, but you can't be racist. And these are mental gymnastics. If I were to then say, well, then if you are prejudiced and you're prejudiced, they can be prejudiced against tall people or short people, or you can be prejudiced against blondes or brunettes. If I can be prejudiced against, or let's say I'm prejudiced against women, I would be sexist or misogynistic. If I'm prejudiced against somebody of another race, that would be racist. That's but they, like I said, they're these mental gymnastics. Anyway, the other word that's changed, which I thought was fascinating, was gender. Gender was almost synonymous with sex, but gender would be, well, like when you're in Latin American Spanish, words, nouns have genders. So you would say la mesa, it's feminine. El sol, that would be masculine, right? And some of it had to do with the grammar, but that's where it is. The new term for gender, the one that is now commonly used, um, was really developed in the 50s. If you look up John Money, he was a psychologist, and he was also in the time of Alfred Kinsey. And these guys kind of like were and they kind of like manipulated the word, and now we're where we are. But back into atheism. So um, the various definitions, some of them refer to somebody who's irreligious, or somebody that doesn't accept, does not believe in deities. Um, the very simple definition is you do not believe in God, and I think that that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Uh, adding anything more really complicates it unnecessarily. Um, and my argument for why it is a religion is this: when you say that you're an atheist, you're saying that God does not exist. And really, you don't know. All you have are arguments. And you can have arguments from science, and actually, science is one of the arguments I use for God. But you can make arguments, and it's fair. That it's not. There are fair arguments for atheism. I can't see God. I don't see Him. People pray, and that there's no immediate answer, or even sometimes a provable answer. Those are all fair. The existence of a deity, and who created God. They're all, we've seen them. Atheists that and please post. I would be curious to see what your thoughts are. But we've gone through a lot of these already, and it comes down to listening to the arguments and using our reason. We kind of come up with what is most convincing to us, right? Um, and you can come to a convincing a point where the arguments are convincing to you that God does not exist. But then you know definitively that God does not exist. I use this example about Dennis Prager, who he was invited to an atheist convention, and he asked all the atheists, "How many of you have ever questioned your belief in atheism?" And nobody raised their hand. Everyone believed, and he said, that for us, those of us that are religious, we are challenged with that all the time. Um, and that's true. I know I've read of countless, people in history, religious people. I think that who's the guy that wrote that translated the first Bible from the trilingual um, Latin, Hebrew, and Greek, I believe. He, it's not Job, but um, anyway, you know, there are arguments that they go all the way back to the very inception of humanity, and these beliefs are some of us trying to find peace of mind, and so on. Anyway, so if you don't believe that God exists, and you've thought it through, then that's fair. But we're always every day we're seeing challenges to our beliefs. Um, if you don't believe if you don't believe it, that's fine. But even you, as an atheist, makes a leap of faith because you don't know everything either. You're just going off the best arguments you have, and you're coming to these conclusions. And it's not fair to say, and this happens a lot, and I made said something similar in my previous video, that I believe that most atheists are atheists because they think it makes them sound smart, and they've been influenced to believe that religious people are stupid. Richard Dawkins writes about this. People with weak minds. Bertrand Russell, people with weak minds, people that are sheep that just follow. Um, but that's not fair. Through history, some of the most brilliant minds have been religious. In fact, most of the most brilliant minds have been religious. But there's some brilliant minds that have struggled with atheism, being atheists. But going back around, it takes a leap of faith for atheists, just as it takes a leap of faith for me. And in that spirit, I would refer to atheism as a religion. I've actually heard some atheists refer to themselves or to their beliefs as a religion. Um, so, I mean, you atheists, if you're challenged with that, you should um, ask some of your fellow atheists what they believe. And also, when I was reading, there was at first I brought up atheism and what it is, and there's a simple answer, but then there were like others that show types of atheism, four types of atheisms, six types of atheisms. Um, they're all pretty similar. They're nuances that are like distinctions without differences without a distinction. So, but anyway, that's my response to that. Um, This video, however, is going to be my case for Christ. And the belief in God is not difficult for me. That that there was the Big Bang, going back to the beginning, to it's called the singularity. This is all supported by physics and experiments. That there was a beginning to our universe, and when that happened, time, matter came into existence that did not exist before. We understand our world because we can knock on tables, we can see each other, we can hear, use our senses, um, the ones that we're aware of. Um, we can comprehend things in the context of the reality, which is the dimensions that we have, uh, going through time. So we have a physical world going through time. That didn't exist prior to the Big Bang. So what was the existence there? And that's where God comes in. Christ is a different story. That is a big challenge for me. When the belief is, and if you guys want to correct me, that's fine, is that God revealed himself at some point and inspired men to write the first books of the Bible, which document the history of the Jews primarily, and there are moral codes built into it. The idea or the prior beliefs were that, or when, prior to monotheism, and there were actually monotheistic faiths before God, before Yahweh, the God of the Jews, but when there were multiple gods that explained things like rain and the sun and the underworld and death, things like that, there were multiple gods. When it all come down to one God, that created a single moral code. Multiple gods did not. And you'll find oftentimes that when there were multiple gods, you have wild variances in morality. It depended on the god that you were following or seeking, or and outside of even I don't know if there's anything. I don't remember ever reading anything in the ancient world in that area, Palestine and Egypt and Greece. I know that they practiced slavery. And people will bring this up that the Bible justifies slavery. Slavery in the Bible, as far as I can remember, and if you can prove me wrong, that's fine, you can bring it up. But most of it were people selling themselves into slavery. This is among the Jews. People selling themselves to pay a debt. Now, in Egypt, they were slaves. I don't know if it was to pay off debts or not, but not all Jews in Egypt were slaves. And everywhere else in Greece, in North, in um, Egypt, there were slaves. Slavery had been around since the beginning of mankind, and it was always the strong overpowering the poor and using that forced labor, sometimes to the death. But anyway, it was different. But so God gave this morality and inspired the writings of these books. And the Jews, of course, followed this. And up until the first century, um, a lot of Jews will say this now, that they weren't expecting the type of Messiah that came. And that's what they're saying now. And I don't know. I just simply don't know if among some of the Jews that belief did exist. The argument would be that this was picked up from some of the other faiths that were in the area, the corn gods in Egypt, for instance. But at some point, there was a man named Jesus who was born in Nazareth, and a lot of people believe that he was the Messiah that had come. And at the time, there were several different sects of Jews: the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Essenes, and the Zealots. Judas being one of the Zealots who wanted a political uprising. Maybe some of those other ones were expecting this type of Messiah. The Zealots were, but he was expecting a political Messiah. But the story is, and this is where I have that challenge, is like I said, God is not a challenge for me. Jesus is, because Jesus, according to our faith, is God incarnate. He made himself human to live among us, and then he sacrificed himself for our sins. And in doing so, in sacrificing himself, in dying and the resurrection, rising from the dead, defeating death, he passed something on to us. And that is eternal life. In other words, our souls live on forever. Our souls, will continue after we're gone. Okay, that's a big pill to swallow. That's not something that's like I said, it's easy for me as to the existence before the singularity. This is a huge challenge, and there are arguments that support it, and the arguments are this: there were witnesses, there was an empty tomb, there were people that were there. There was documentation, the Gospels, and the Gospels were written afterwards when once the apostles who started teaching started to die or they were getting older, they would write this down. The first synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, the people that are experts on this say that they came from a single source, or that maybe Mark was the original source that gave verse to the other ones. John is a completely different story, completely different author, completely different style. But that these were documentations, and there were other writings that we do not consider inspired for some reason. Like that Ash, the Shepherd of Hermes. I can't think of any other one right now that was close to being a canonical, but and that there were other people that were writing the same thing. And those that support Christianity will tell you, and this is true, is that something happened to shake up the Jews in particular at the time that chose to go this route. And it wasn't all a bunch of peasants. There were some educated people. And, we always think of, I don't know if we're thinking of, people in this time that they're like just barely past loincloths and leather straps on their feet. But this was 300 years, 200 years after the Greeks established the distance to Saturn and to the moon. They knew that the Earth was round. There were books in Alexandria, science books. There was a lot of knowledge. There were a lot of smart people at the time. And so it wasn't like this was just like a mass. And some of the more brilliant people were in on this movement that back then it was called the Way. They were following it along. And like I said, there were different stories that supported that this happened or something happened, something significant happened. And the other argument that they say is, once the Romans started the persecutions, and it happened really early on. I mean, there was the destruction of the temple around the year 70. This was 30 plus 40, almost 40 years after Jesus had been crucified. There were persecutions, the Jews thought it was creepy that they were inviting non-Jews in on the movement, and so they totally rejected it. And as I said in my last video, they decided to regroup and only accept the books that were in Hebrew. But then the movement picked up some steam, and people went to their deaths with this idea happily. They didn't recant the beliefs. It was that powerful, and it was recent, and it was and so, like I said, it's a big pill to swallow. But how do I answer that? Like I said, mass hysteria. Um, you know, I need something more. The other thing that is really a challenge for me, and is a reason why I accept this, and I say that with some trepidation, that I can't say that I believe something, because if I can say, well, I believe that um, my wife's name is or my children's names are these. I mean, I know them, that there's no challenge for me to believe them. I just, I know them. But this is a challenge, and so I can't say that this is, something that I'm like, oh, that's not a problem for me to believe this like God is. I'll accept it. I'll accept it, and I will live it, um, and I'll continue to study this to see if, at some point I decide that there's a challenge to it that I can't overcome. But the moral teaching is also significant, and there are the moral teachings along the way of the church, and the Sermon on the Mount. But the most powerful one isn't even in the Bible for me. It's not even in the Bible. It's in the Divine Comedy, written centuries later by Dante. And this is what is really convincing to me when, and this is, one of the things about Dante's the Divine Comedy is that this was at a time when there were inquisitions. The church would look out for heretics. The Divine Comedy was consistent with Catholic teaching, although they didn't like that there was some clergy down in hell. It was consistent, and in the book of Inferno, there are, I believe, it's 9 circles of hell, and you go down the 9 circles, and at some point they coincide with the 7 deadly sins. Okay, maybe I guess after the first 2, then you go down to the 7 deadly sins. And as you're going further down, it's worse. It's the worse the crime or the sin, and the worse the punishment. And at the end, we're thinking fire and brimstone, and that's where actually a lot of us get our idea or our vision of fire and brimstone. But at the very center circle of hell, they're frozen solid in ice, and they're facing Satan. Satan is the center of hell. And when you find out what the crimes are along the way, there's, you think murder would be like the worst one, right? Or murdering an innocent. The worst crime, the worst sin that you can commit is betraying someone that trusted you, a friend, family, someone that loved you, and you betray them. That is the worst sin. Of course, at the bottom of sin, there are several characters from Greek stories, but Judas is down there at the very bottom of the pit of hell, right? Anyway, then as the story goes along, he goes to paradise, heaven, and there are also various circles in heaven, and there's um, the what you did, as you go up into the gradations, the closer you are to the center of heaven, and there are the 7 virtues, right, that go along. And so, there's people that give to charity, and people that um, persevered, and so on. But what's the greatest thing that you can do? Is give your life for a stranger, for someone you don't even know. And at the center of paradise is Christ. I get chills every time that I talk about it. But that seems, and this is where I know some atheists are going to come back on me and saying, there's emotion here. Yes, you're right that there's a lot of emotion here. It feels really, really right. It feels very good. I mentioned this in another one of my videos. I would talk to my dad and how much my dad loves my mom, and the story that I read, that I heard on a Instagram page about a man. This is a scenario, if you're walking along the beach and you look out into the ocean, and 2 people are drowning, your wife and your daughter. You can only save one. Who would you save? And the answer is you would go in and save your daughter and then go back and drown with your wife. And that's an example of incredible love and incredible sacrifice, right? Anyway, this has gone on a little bit longer than I thought, but those are my thoughts and those are my arguments. I appreciate comments down below. Some of the other comments were fantastic, and I'm, the ones that I saw, I I'm answering, of course, the one about atheism. If you like this, please give it a thumbs up. Even if you don't like it, just give it a thumbs up. Put a comment down, that would be great, and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Have a great day.